Well, we're gonna get rolling and answer some of the questions as different people come in. Well, first of all, great job. Hopefully, all of you are watching the three-part series. We had 270 downloads of the series in the last, well, actually 2 weeks, because the other one, the second part that had the most downloads. Um, so yeah, that's really cool that people out there are been watching it, and it's been really nice to have internally as well with all the Inner Armor clients, which are hundreds, and then the 120, 130 Royer Neuroscience clients. So it's great to have the resource. If you ever have somebody that you want to send it off to, feel free to do that, and they can always email us with some questions. So let's go ahead and we're going to go through our questions that were submitted by some different people, and we'll introduce the question, and then Amy and I'll go back and forth and take a shot at answering them. We might not have the perfect answers, but we'll start with number one. And I have a little interesting story on this.
Let's go.
Okay.
You do it.
Some diets discuss cheat days and how occasionally it's okay to cheat a bit on my diet nutrition plan. What would be your thoughts on the occasional cheat day as it relates to optimal brain health and nutrition? Many voices in the health fitness space have recently highlighted the negative effects of alcohol for gut and brain health. You mentioned fermented foods is good, so is alcohol such as beer okay for your gut health? So I guess we have
Two questions.
two questions here. Let's talk about the first one, which is cheat days. I think it's funny because the first time that I ever heard of the idea of cheat day is back in the early 2000s. We were working with this NBA player and heading out to California a lot. And actually, our family got very close with him. And so I would take the young kids out and stuff. But he was this 7-foot center for the Clippers, 270-pound guy. I mean, just a monster of a man against the next to all the Royers who are quite small. But he would have to be on all these crazy diets, and all of a sudden we'd get to Sunday, and that was his cheat day. And I've never seen a human eat so much food and so many different foods. And it was so tough being around this guy on cheat day because, I mean, he would just eat everything under the sun. And then he'd be sick for a couple days after that. So that was my first experience of cheat days. I think there is some, well, I think it's there, you need to give yourself some leniency at times, but I think there's an extreme. One of the things, carb night solution, which is a lot of heavy carbs, is on one day of the week, has some scientific validity to it, but there's also kind of the psychological and emotional component. So we're a complete human, and how that kind of plays into that, and then also the aftermath is really important. Amy always talks about like a 90-10 or a 80-20 principle, but since you're the expert, what would you say about cheat days?
I'm not the expert. I'm weighing in on all this stuff alongside of you all. So I would say that one of the concepts that gets lost when someone says cheat day is how much food are you going to eat that's on the cheat. So for example, we just ate fried Kipling over here for our dinner, and then we of course balanced it off with a salad or whatever. But I think it's important that we didn't eat mounds and mounds of the fried Kipling because that's where it becomes really hard for your body to digest. And then that's where you have all this inflammation that's a byproduct of working through all that kind of food. But if you could do it in moderation, I think there is an 80-20 rule that is a decent way to go. You do have to also be realistic about whether you have decent gut health or not. Like if you're somebody who does not have good gut health, then any of the food that you're going to cheat on is going to be harder on you than another person who has better gut health. So, and usually when we talk about gut health, this all has to do with whether you have like symptoms like burping or gas or irregular bowel movements or constipation, or all of these things are your thermostat as to how your gut health is. And if you're just as regular as can be, you never have stomach aches or bloating or
Reflux.
regurgitation,
Yeah.
reflux, those kind of things, then you're probably going to tolerate a little bit of cheating better than somebody else. Now, there is another little principle to think about cheating is the body really likes diversity. So if you get into an eating pattern that's like, I eat the exact same thing every day, and then I eat this, and then I eat that, and I eat it at the same time, the body is an absolute incredible hacker and will learn how to live on, less and less. It's very efficient. So some of those people that were doing like the carb night solution, they had got their bodies into that keto, and the body gets so smart that it starts living off less. And so then they would throw the cheat day in to stir up the body and mess up that process that the body had figured out. And then they would actually lose more weight afterwards. Again, all of this is people that are going way, way extreme in one direction or another, and we're looking for a little bit more moderation within our program and within our understanding of the body. I'm not going to say you shouldn't be keto or you shouldn't do cheat days, but more about the principles of thinking like, on, if you're going to do a cheat day, that doesn't mean you overate and just like created a sugar disaster in your body. But cheats can be good by providing some variety, and that gives a little bit of confusion to the digestive system so that it doesn't get into this like, I'm the most efficient processor in the world. The body can survive on less and less if you just keep feeding it the exact same thing. So anyway, that's the
Yeah.
principle.
What do you think about the whole alcohol one? Because we are talking a lot about the fermented
Right.
foods and how important they are.
Mhm.
And that is even coming, I think, to the forefront as you look at nutrition, even more so now than we've ever seen it,
Mhm.
how important the fermented foods are. So, how do we create that distinction?
Yeah. Well, I don't think you're going to read anywhere that alcohol, as in the beverage, alcohol is good for your gut health. It is very difficult for the intestinal lining, which is your very first
Mm.
barrier from your inside world versus the outside world. So that would be my first thought about not really liking the alcohol. The second thing is it disrupts the microbiome balance, which is another thing that we're working on getting the good microbiome going. And the alcohol is toxic to some of those beneficial bacteria. It impairs nutrient absorption. We talked about that in the lecture and how important that is because, like, you can be eating good stuff, but if your gut system isn't in a healthy space, you can't absorb well. Anyways, and it also triggers inflammation. So it's really not a health food in any way, shape, or form. I've heard people say that if you do really want to drink, you want to look at more of the craft creations out there. Or also the really hard clear liquor, I guess, is less difficult on the gut. I've never really looked deeply into this because of the work that we do. I read many years ago that alcohol is a known neurological disruptor. And so it's just not something that I would like to encourage people to do because we're working so hard on getting the brain to be optimal and balanced. So I feel like it's something that's difficult for the brain even more than for the gut. So that's where I wouldn't like it. But I don't think you classify alcohol as a ferment. I'd have to look that up further. But like for example, kombucha is just like a barely fermented beverage. But the things like sauerkraut and yogurts, those also have probiotic cultures within them where alcohol doesn't have that, and alcohol doesn't have fiber in it. So it's really not like a health food. So I guess I'm hoping I answered that I wouldn't really see alcohol as a fermented food. So they're two different categories.
Yeah, I had an interesting story this last week where I was not so much on the nutrition side, but I had somebody that I was measuring their sleep each night, and we were looking at their desaturations, which is when you're having a hard time taking in oxygen. And so with this thumb ring that we have, we can measure that. And so I was watching multiple nights for this kind of elite executive, and I was noticing the first 4 hours of every evening, he was desatting like almost 50, 60% of the time, which is not good. That means you're losing cells. The cells are dying. So I started normally those desats tend to happen in the second half of sleep if it's hypopnea or apnea. I was like, this is really interesting. And so I asked him, have you been drinking a little bit more? And, sure enough, he mentioned that he'd been had a lot of different um, business related things, dinners and stuff the last few days. So I said, hey, let's go for a few nights without drinking. It was incredible. Like he went from 50% desats at night to 5% in almost like just one day. And so we're gonna try it again with him drinking some more and see how that affects that because we always are very hesitant of the physician says to their patient, hey, have a few glasses of wine before bed because yeah, there might be some sedating qualities, but you're also taking in a toxin which can cause inflammation and some other things. Different
Yeah,
lecture.
it is. But I guess the one way that it fits into this first question is that I think with alcohol that there may be some benefit to like cheat days, but also using it in moderation just because it is hard on the body. So, yep, that's where I would put it.
Okay, so our next one, which I guess we're on to question 3 instead of our second one. What happens to the brain-body connection when there's some sort of damage to the CNS, the spinal cord injury, or a neurological disorder? Does eating well become more important, and can it possibly aid in restoring health? And so I'll kind of start on this one where when we're looking at how the brain is functioning and in a neurodegenerative disease, the brain and body are in just as much of a battle physiologically as you would be as if you were in real battle, like where there's so much external stress, but now you have this internal stress. So we're really talking about the autonomic nervous system, and that's the system's ability to stay regulated and not get too much extreme of sympathetic, which is this fight flight state, which can be very toxic to the body, create inflammation, many of these things that we've talked about gut inflammation, those kind of things. In the autonomic nervous system, you can see that in increased sympathetic responses. Also, we don't want that nervous system to go too parasympathetic, which is now it's not recovering well. It's almost getting, the wheels are kind of getting stuck in the mud and it's hard to get the energy that you need, brain fog, and those kind of things. And so you start to bring in a neurodegenerative disease, and then all of a sudden, everything is intensified. And so this autonomic nervous system has to be just as balanced and prepared to manage this as you would have an elite athlete or an executive. I mean, it has to be dialed in because it's just getting pummeled by this disease process. And we've seen this as we've done some of this work with Prodromus Institute, where they look at stem cells and then particularly these exosomes. And we've had an opportunity, a privilege to assess a couple hundred brains of people before these, and many of those have degenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's. And what you see almost immediately, it's getting to the point now when we do an EEG, I don't even have to ask the person sometimes what the disease is because I can see it on the EEG. And what do I see? Is the electrical current is extremely out of balance. That's where I would start, is that there is going to be this predisposition to really get out of kilter because of the neurodegenerative. And so hence we need to shore up not just brain functioning and physiological functioning, but the nutritional side. Anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I would totally agree. And that it's a huge factor and can have a huge impact.
Yes.
Anything from a concussion, I would recommend certain foods after a concussion, all things that are like anti-inflammatory, just to help the brain because it has inflammation in it from a concussion. But also if you are thinking about mental health concerns, all of our neurotransmitters depend on our digestive system. So it's huge what you're eating. And sugar is literally toxic in those situations. So getting people down on the sugar and controlling the blood sugar has a huge, huge impact on mental health. Anything that has to do with reproductive health also
Mhm.
is hugely related to the nutrition and the health of your gut system and its ability to do its job. Spinal cord injury that was mentioned in that question, what I would say about that is that there's a lot of really difficult things that can happen from a spinal cord injury that impact the digestive organ. In the many places of that organ. But so there can be really difficult situations where there's decreased motility, decreased absorption. So it's just twice as important what you're eating in that situation and how you're helping the gut to do its best job. Because if you have a spinal cord injury, you're working from way, way behind and trying to just bring yourself up to anything that could be close to normal. So for it, in just a quick example of something like that, I think when I read that question, I thought of my dad who has Parkinson's, and he became unable to swallow because he lost the functionality of his swallow muscles. And so we had to switch him over to tube feeding, which I think I may have mentioned in the video was a hard and sad thing. However, he now eats the most healthy diet I can ever imagine because we're able to select exactly what goes in that tube. And he is extremely healthy. It's really amazing. And if we didn't have the tube and if we were trying to get all those foods in him on our own, I don't think my dad would be with us anymore because he couldn't chew, the harder, more fibrous foods that you need to eat, but we can get them in the formula. So in some ways it was a reverse benefit, but very, very important that the nutrition plays a huge role.
Yeah. I would add one more thing to that. The kind of default, at least in the US, was that the formula that Amy got for her dad, which, was just kind of this is what the insurance company is providing. You just think it's formula. She started analyzing it and realized it was just absolute junk and went on a journey first to try to make her own formula to go in the tube. But then we found a company that was sourcing very well, that had really, non-inflammatory things, which was a very difficult process. You'd think like, this person should be getting some good stuff, but they weren't getting good stuff. You were going to pump junk into them. And then recently the insurance changed and it was like almost a 2-week battle for Amy to actually go and find the right food from somebody else that the insurance would cover. So don't just assume, like in a situation like that, if you have a loved one who has a spinal cord injury or have something where they have to be fed, that you're gonna get the right thing. Remember, just like curating our dietary choices of things that we take in, we can't assume that these tube fittings and things are actually good unless we analyze them and curate them.
Yeah, and of course that story goes back to other people before me that went and advocated for their loved ones. So I think the food that I feed my dad is from, a family of a child that had a tube feeding failure to thrive, and so they themselves went and did all the groundwork to get to the formula that I feed my dad. So being healthy and trying to be healthy is a hard journey. Sometimes if I want to feel sorry for myself, I think about people like that they really had a reason to feel sorry for themselves and they just turned and went straight in the face of the hurricane and figured out what they could do to come out the other side. So
yeah. Okay. You taught the importance of getting your probiotics through fermented foods. What is the difference between a probiotic and a prebiotic?
that's a great question. So the probiotic are the living microorganisms that we want to be in our gut tract. And so you can take probiotics and they come in all different shapes and sizes. They're still under so much study that nobody really knows the exact needs. But you can measure stuff, and some practitioners are really, really good in this space. And then you can design your own probiotic. But more what I was hoping for is that we would try to get our probiotics through eating more natural. So like things like some good plain yogurt has a lot of probiotics in it. But like I said, not the Go-Gurt sticks, which might have 2 or 3 probiotics in it. But anyway, probiotics are living microorganisms that we want inside of us. We want tons of them and we want tons of variety of them. So when we take a probiotic though, that doesn't mean like, oh, I took it, I'm good to go. Now we need it in there and we need it to live and we need it to reproduce. And so we got to feed it. And that's where prebiotics come in
Okay.
because these little guys, they eat, they need to eat. And what they get to eat is what is left by the time it pretty much gets to the large intestine. Because we get all the good stuff first. We get it and we absorb it in the small intestine. So then it gets to the large intestine, which is where most of our probiotic, our microorganisms live. And so what ends up getting there is fiber. So there's soluble fiber and insoluble fiber, and it makes it usually down all the way to the colon. And then the microbiome gets to feast on all that good stuff. And then here's the takeaway for today. There's something called postbiotics.
Oh boy.
I think partly because people just like to make up words, and that's probably really true. But so now your new word is postbiotic, and that is the production of the microorganisms, microbiome. And that's really cool stuff because the stuff they make for us, we can't get for ourselves. So we're basically like their servants. We're like, we'll feed you if you'll please make us these postbiotics. And it's amazing stuff. Things like short chain fatty acids are produced by the microbiome, and that helps with a ton of things, but it's especially great for our brain. And so that's of course why we talk about it a lot. But that is the difference between a prebiotic and probiotic. And a lot of people nowadays, they make a product that contains both because everybody knows you kind of need both. But if you also eat a nice high fiber diet, then you don't need to eat a prebiotic. So one less pill.
Gotcha.
It's also kind of cool if you eat just a fresh fruit or a fresh vegetable, generally it has some microorganisms on it and it's very fibrous. So then you're like, there it is.
Got it all.
Yeah.
Boom. Okay. Last one, and it's a double question again.
Goodness.
Okay. Can you elaborate more on options for intermittent fasting? How do I figure out what is best for me? And what kinds of fats are considered bad that I should avoid? That is a
That's a
loaded
big question. Come on,
Let's first start with the
yeah.
intermittent fasting
Yep.
and how do you figure out? I think the fact that the person asked the question, how do I figure out what is best for me? They're realizing that it's not one size fits all. And that's kind of where we would start with this is, over the last few years, intermittent fasting has been, a hot topic and it gets, hotter and hotter as we go. And the problem with some of these things is that they have some really good concepts in them and there's things that you can benefit from, but all of a sudden they just explode and now everybody should be doing it. Everybody should be doing it at this rate. These are the exact numbers. And what I've seen clinically is that, because I do work with a lot of executives that maybe, early in life were really good athletes or performed very high in different things, and maybe even now still run triathlons and that kind of stuff, that will get into the intermittent fasting and they're disciplined enough to do it, but I'll actually see some negative things start happening in their brain that are related to stress and related to the fact that they're producing more cortisol, which is another whole lecture. That's more adrenaline than they should be at the wrong times because the intermittent fasting is actually working in a negative for them. And a lot of that is because it's just the stage of development that they're in, and that's impacting them. So you're not the same person every year of your life as you go through. You actually change. And that's why it's very important to listen to your body and your heart, like in heart rate variability, and look at labs so that you can see what cortisol is doing, what you can see these different like blood sugars are doing, those kind of things. So all that to say on my side of things on this is it is not one size fits all, and you need to be getting concrete objective measurements. For us, the highest level is the brain. Measuring the EEG, using the headset to kind of see where am I? Is this actually helping me, or are my thetas, which are my recovery mechanisms, dropping in a negative way? Are my high betas, which are my adrenaline, And maybe that's why I feel a little bit more energy, because I'm hacking cortisol and adrenaline, which ultimately are going to create metabolic problems for you. So it's very, very important when you're going to do a drastic thing to the body like that, which can have positive effects, that you measure it correctly and that you have some metrics that you're using, and it's not just something that you're just going out without really thinking through it. That's my side of it. What are you going to add?
So I think when I think about intermittent fasting, I wanted us to think about it in the context of the three pillars that we're looking at. So gut health being one of them, liver health, and blood sugar control. So what I've read is in relation to those three things, the minimum amount of fasting time you would like to do in a day is 12 hours to get the benefits for those three pillars. So that's not that big of a deal. So if you're going to bed at, if you stop your eating at 8 o'clock and you go to bed at 10 or whatever, you wake up and you're able to eat again at 8 o'clock, that's not that big of a deal. But they're saying in the literature that they're seeing all those blood sugar, gut health, and liver benefits with just the 12-hour fast. And so a lot of the longevity people are saying that your body, it gets the most broad benefit out of that 12-hour fast. Now, there's always people that want to go longer and take it further and see what that's like for them. And that's great. Then what I would suggest is you go another hour, try that for a week. If you feel good, you go another hour, try that for a week. And you can either be cutting the hour at the evening time or you can cut the hour in the morning time to extend that fasting period. And again, the thing we're looking for is just allowing the body to have this really steady blood sugar for this 12 to 14 to 16-hour period, to give the digestive tract just a rest period from the work of digestion, and to let the liver have time to detox stuff out of our system. So a lot of times when people talk about intermittent fasting, to me, they're talking about trying to lose weight with it, which oftentimes that ends up coming around and kicking you in the butt, because what a lot of people default to is during those hours of their eating window is making bad choices about what they're eating because they're starving. So when you're looking at intermittent fasting, I think you also should look at what would be a good amount for me to eat in a day. And then I'm going to put that in the feeding window. Not, I'm going to starve, and then I'm going to be like so hungry that I'm just going to grab a bag of chips and cheese and salsa and go crazy, because that's what I would do. But
yeah, I was going to say, that sounds
chips and
pretty good to me.
familiar,
That's
but
great.
anyway, the intermittent fasting, you can really take away your benefits if you are choosing poorly during the feeding window. So a lot of this is, again, that whole curating thing is we need to think about principles here. So hopefully that's helpful to you about the time frame, that it doesn't have to be that extreme time frame. And in fact, many females do not do well with that longer than 12-hour fast. And the female system has a few more intricate hormones that have to balance out and has a little impact on blood sugar. And so not every female does that well on it. And also not every male does that well on the longer fasting either. So it's really important to learn yourself. And that's where that whole curating comes in, because Doc and I have totally found we have a pretty healthy lifestyle. We have a pretty healthy diet, but just the last month we both wore a blood sugar monitor, and our blood sugars are totally different. And that's just something that's so important for us to understand, because when we have to make our own decisions day in and day out, and I don't need to be telling Doc how to eat if it's not the best way for his blood sugar. So everyone needs to have a little bit of curating cap on for this question.
And then the person tied into that question about fats.
Good and bad fat.
What kind of fats are considered bad?
Yeah.
That I should avoid?
So hard.
Here we go.
Yeah, the bad and good fats is such a hard question. I think I do have a cute little graphic. Maybe I can put it out with the notes from this webinar, but it changes what people are saying are good and bad fats, but generally speaking, the least processed fat is the best. So, of course, something like an avocado is fantastic, right? Because it's just straight out of nature. Nuts are good. However, some people have sensitivities to different kinds of nuts. So there again, you kind of have to know what's good for you. Olive oil, great. But don't cook it on high heat because then it has some breakdown that then actually is negative. So there are high heat oils. Those are usually more, I believe, the more solid ones. So actually like a butter that's from a grass-fed cow would be a good fat in that situation. There's coconut oil that is so good for you. Avocado oil. We already said that eating the avocado. I'm just trying to think. I really mostly do butter and olive oil at my house, but ghee is good. But it's just the problem is all these oils that you go to the grocery store and they're just all the way, it says vegetable oil and seed oil, and those things sound good because they sound natural, but they have been processed out of their minds. And so they're now basically an inflammatory object that you're putting in your body. So you really want to look for the most natural fats in their natural environment.
Yeah, and that if we're getting fats from animals,
Yeah,
that those
the
animals are eating green,
right,
right?
exactly.
So the animals that are eating green that would have fats with them, that is going to be more of fat that's good for you versus an animal that's eating brown stuff, which is going to increase omega-6 and those kind of things. We don't want those kind of things. So that's the importance of, why does somebody eat a grass-fed this or get butter that's grass-fed is because we want the source to start upstream at the green thing, not the processed brown thing. And that's how, for somebody simple like me, that's how I process it. Where did it come from? So you can have two sets of eggs in the store, and they're going to have a different effect on you
Yep.
based on where that chicken came from, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, there's also a good book called The Queen of Fats. If you want to know, I like that book. I like that book.
It's old, but it's good.
It's good. It's good. It's really cool, the stuff that's in there that you wouldn't believe can happen with the right fats, especially when they put it up against different medicines we use for pain and inflammation. It's just crazy. So The Queen of Fats, easy read for the person that's interested in that. I'd recommend that. Anything else before we shut this thing down?
No, I don't think so. I really appreciate anybody who watched the videos.
Yes.
Thanks for watching. I hope it was helpful, and I hope the principles stick out and that it gives you enough to go on, because the whole idea behind it was that each of us has to go and do to figure this out, and it's not easy. Nutrition and eating and health, it's very complicated. I have a few people that I really like to read their stuff or listen to their stuff. So I'll also put that in whatever my little fat list. If you need to know a name or two of people that are good and have been around a long time doing their thing. But those are usually where I get my best information. And keep forging your inner armor out there, your nutrition inner armor.
Yes, awesome. And if you have questions or need anything, just feel reach out. We love answering these kind of questions and being helpful along the way. We don't have all the answers, but in some areas we've been doing this for a while and we're pretty good at it. So we'll catch you guys later. Thanks a lot for being part of the series. See ya.
Forge your inner armor.